Hello, my name is David Chambliss. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services at the San Mateo Foster City School District. This is a Google Meet recording of a presentation that we made to the Board of Trustees on June 18th. That presentation focused on our fall program plan in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. The plan as we have developed it is organized around our pandemic recovery framework. The county has emphasized 4 pillars for a safe return to school: health and hygiene, face coverings, physical distancing, and limiting gatherings. We've used these 4 pillars to organize our planning for the fall. In addition, we've identified a handful of guiding principles to help us make decisions and set priorities for the fall. The first is health and safety. We want to ensure that any decisions we make ensure the health and safety of our students, families, teachers, staff, and site leaders. Of course, this is defined in the county pandemic guidance. The second principle is about equity. We want to make sure that our decisions focus on supporting key student groups, our English learners, our students with disabilities, and any social emotional struggling students that we have. In addition, we of course want to make sure that the decisions we make ensure rigorous, meaningful, and consistent student learning across all models we implement in the fall. Importantly, we want to also make sure that any models that we implement build community and connection. And finally, we want to make sure that our plans provide positive learning and effective supports, not only for our students and families, but also for our teachers and staff. Anytime we are making a challenging or difficult decision, we come back to these guiding principles to help us decide. So our recommendations will be for 2 kinds of models this fall. The first is for full-time distance learning at home, and the second is a so-called hybrid model, where part of the week is spent at school and part of the week at home. Of course, it's our goal that we ultimately return to normal school, and we recognize that as the fall unfolds, that we may have to actually move back and forth between these various states. It may be that we start the year in full-time at-home distance learning as we move then into the hybrid model and hopefully into full-time schooling. But depending on the circumstances with the virus, we know that we need to be ready to move back and forth nimbly between these different models. So here are the first set of recommendations we have. Now these focus primarily on the hybrid model first because of the complexity of implementing a schedule of both at home and at school learning. And you'll see that there are 6 recommendations that we have, and I'm going to go through those now. The first recommendation is that we sort students into stable cohorts. This is specifically called for in the recovery framework, and we focus on this idea of stable cohorts. Well, why stable? Well, first of all, the importance of having a stable or consistent cohort of students contacting each other is because it actually enables contact tracing. We can track down if, heaven forbid, there is an instance of the virus in our schools. We can track down who that student or staff member came in contact with. The other reason for having stable cohorts is that it actually allows us to create the conditions to keep students and staff safe, meaning physical distancing in classrooms and common areas. It's actually important to note that in the pandemic framework, that stable cohorts is not specifically about limiting the number of contacts to the smallest number. The framework allows us to balance the importance, yes, of limiting contacts as much as possible, but balancing that against the challenges of being in school and making sure that we meet the needs of our students. So there are 2 what we call must-do steps to ensuring stable cohorts. The first is that we schedule no more than 50% of our students in any one classroom. And the guidance that we are using for setting up classrooms and other common spaces is in the link here that's in blue that says guidance. The second must do is that schools need to create grade level stable cohorts. In other words, we want to ensure that there is no mixing in classrooms between grade levels. A third may do step, which is really only possible at the elementary level, is to create classroom stable cohorts, meaning that a class of students stay together all day long. So let's talk through some examples of what this would look like. A must cohort at the elementary level is an example of a 5th grade with 3 teachers. We could imagine those 3 classrooms having 90 students. So the first step is to split those 90 students into 2 cohorts, an A and a B, 50% each, so 45 and 45. And then because we're talking about 45 students across 3 classrooms, we could approximate that there would be 15 students, in this case in cohort A, in each classroom. Now it is, according to the framework, it's acceptable for those 15 students in each classroom to interact with each other. We could imagine teachers working across the 3 groupings. And one of the main advantages of having this kind of grade level cohort is that when we think about providing targeted supports for certain equity groups, we can pull from all 15 groups of students to create the groups and provide targeted supports and interventions. A May cohort, as I mentioned, is a more strict cohort. This is an example in 3rd grade where we would just take one class of 24 students. We would break it into 2 cohorts, A and B, and that would come at different times. Now, in this case, you do not see classes mixing in with each other. You do not see a teacher sharing loads across different classrooms. One of the real challenges of this is that it's actually quite difficult to form some of the equity groups. For example, the designated ELD classes for English learners in these much smaller cohorts, and at least difficult to create them and to keep them stable. The must cohort in the middle school is really just simply the step of taking a grade level and dividing it in half. As you see here, it's a grade level of 6th graders with 270 students divided into 2 cohorts, and then dividing those cohorts across their typical 7-period schedule. And in this example, we have 135 students spread across say up to 10 classes. And those actually, as they go through the day, they can mix and move and interact with each other. Now, because at the middle school level, key equity groups have scheduled classes. So for example, ELD for English learners or resource classes for some of our students with disabilities. The equity groups are embedded in the schedule. And so it's very possible to make sure that they are well served. Our second recommendation based on this idea of stable cohorts is to actually have those cohorts attend school in paired days schedule. So you can see, for example, here, cohort A would come to school on Mondays and Tuesdays, and they would be at home on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Cohort B would be the opposite of that, where they're at school on Thursday and Friday, and at home Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. For our special day class students, we are planning that they could be at school actually on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you can see that based on this plan, that actually all students would be at home on Wednesday. We anticipate a daily schedule that's much like a minimum day schedule, 4 to 4.5 hours in the morning, which would include class, breaks, and recess, that there would be a grab-and-go lunch, that some students could actually stay having had a physically distanced lunch, and then there could be support for some of them after school in a 1.5 to 2 hour period after lunch. And I'll come back to those lunch and after lunch scenarios in a moment. Now, why did we land on this idea of the paired days schedule? Well, most importantly, the paired days schedule allows us to have a day of deep cleaning Wednesday between the Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday pairs. It also makes sure that students are in school at least a couple days each week. And importantly, it supports our ability to deliver supports to key equity groups. We did look at some other alternatives. We considered the AM/PM schedule, where we would have Cohort A come in the morning and Cohort B come in the afternoon. There's some real advantages to this. Most importantly, students would be in school every day. But there's some real challenges which caused us to reject this option. It's very difficult to do the cleaning needed in this single hour between the two A and B cohorts. It leaves very little time for us to support key equity groups. It challenges our ability to get ready in case we have to go out on distance learning, and it really limits teachers' planning time and collaboration. We also considered what's called the alternating week schedule. This is kind of like the paired days, but instead of 2 days, it's a whole week. Now, there's some advantages with the continuity of longer learning windows, and from a tracking the virus point of view, there's some real advantages if one cohort is in school for a week and the other is at home. Our teams, however, thought the long gaps in which students would be at home actually were a challenge. And we worried about the two cohorts of students getting on rather different learning arcs. So, and in addition, that it would present some real childcare challenges for our families, where you'd need childcare one week, not the next, and so forth. So for that reason, we actually rejected the alternating weeks and landed on the A/B paired days schedule. The third recommendation we have, as I mentioned before, is that the main part of the day ends at lunch, much like it does on a minimum day. Students would grab and go lunch, and importantly, this protects our stable cohorts. Lunch is probably the greatest challenge for maintaining the stable cohorts, and so we would simply send most of students home. Then there could be some students, our key equity groups, that could stay and participate in a physically distanced lunch, meaning they would spread out around the cafeteria and maintain the 6 feet distancing required. And we could do this within the grade level stable cohorts. Of course, this suggests that in terms of our transportation for many of our students, a lot of them would go home at lunchtime, but then there would be another round of transportation to support the equity groups that stayed after lunch. After lunch, as mentioned, could be, as we said, important time to support key equity groups. It would also be a time that teachers could check in with the distance learners who were at home that day. It also could be a time when teachers would engage in their own professional learning and planning. As I mentioned, it's about 1.5 to 2 hours. We should note that there's some variations here with the elementary and the middle school in terms of what actually could happen in those after lunch hours. And so it's important to know that as we work with our colleagues, our labor leaders in SMETA, that we will be ironing out both at the elementary and at the middle school level exactly what's expected of staff and what's offered to students in that time after lunch. Fifth recommendation, as it was noted, is that Wednesday is a distance learning day for everyone. Of course, as mentioned, this supports deep cleaning between the cohorts. We could imagine at the elementary level that actually the day could begin with a distance learning morning meeting with the teacher and their A and B cohorts. It also could be a time for some targeted check-ins with key students or groups. And importantly, it's also another time when teachers could be engaged in planning and collaboration. At the middle school, however, we actually want to make it a day of what we call synchronous meeting and learning. Students at home would be on a regular 7-period schedule, and they would be expected to check in with their first, second, and third, and so forth teachers according to that schedule, hence the idea of it being synchronized. And again, exactly how these Wednesdays play out, we want to clarify and collaborate collaboration with our SMETA leadership. One of the things we want to think about is, because Wednesday is an important deep cleaning day, it may be that teachers work from home on that day so we can go into classrooms and do the cleaning necessary. The sixth recommendation is, as mentioned, the middle school 7-period schedule. As we looked at the alternatives of different kinds of block schedules and things like that, we decided that really maintaining the 7-period schedule was a real advantage. It helped us maintain some sense of what is normal and routine for the students and teachers, and assured important continuity, especially if we come back to school, as we hope, full-time. So that's the 6 recommendations that I can speak to very specifically now. You'll see here some examples of schedules that could be, now this is the elementary school schedule. And I would recommend, if you really want to zero in and read this slide carefully, that you pause this recording at this time. And then if you want to see the middle school schedule and look at it in more detail, you can of course pause and look at that schedule. Just a couple things to call out about the middle school schedule is you see the Cohort A on Monday and Tuesday in school, and Cohort B at home on Thursday and Friday. And you'll note Wednesday is a 7-period synchronous learning day when all students are at home. And again, pause this recording if you want to look at either of these in more detail. Then there's a set of recommendations that we're still working on, and you'll see those here. And these actually speak not only to the hybrid model, but also the full distance learning recommendations that we have. The first is around the daily schedule. When we think about the daily schedule, it's like, when do we start? When do we end? When do students and teachers take breaks? When do we hold recess? So there's a lot of factors that we have to think about. Start and end times, for example, may be impacted by transportation, whether we can in fact bring full buses or only half buses or even quarter buses when we're transporting students around the district. Also thinking about the demand of taking temperatures of students as they come on campus, we may want to stagger start times to allow for that kind of process. Again, we'll be engaged with our SMETA colleagues in finalizing the decisions around the daily schedule. Another recommendation still to be determined is the one about online curriculum. We do recognize the importance, after our experience this spring, of supporting students and our teachers with curriculum that allows for daily new learning, that supports students to work what we call asynchronously or separately from the teacher being live with them. So we're looking at curriculum both at the elementary and middle school levels. Right now, we're leaning more at the elementary level toward deeper use of our current curriculum. Middle school, the curriculum is a little stronger at the secondary level, and so we're still going through it with our teachers. Most importantly, as we think about these issues of online curriculum, is making sure that we've allowed enough time up front at the beginning of the year that teachers have a chance to get used to planning and delivering this curriculum. And then, of course, that students and families understand how to manage the platforms and the learning that occurs within them. And again, this is a topic that we will engage with SMETA leadership around. Another recommendation we're still trying to finalize is around OnetoOne Chromebooks. You know, of course, the state is just now finalizing its budget. We do not know for sure what kind of cut we may be facing, and so we're holding off on a final decision about OnetoOne Chromebooks until we know more about that budget. We also have to make some final decisions about at what grade spans. Do we want to make sure that TK to first grade students all have one-to-one Chromebooks? We're pretty clear about 3rd to 8th that yes, we need to have that, but we need to finalize our thinking on the earlier grades. And we also importantly need to clarify our screen time expectations. Distance learning is not meant to be a model where students spend all their time on the computer, and so we want to make sure that we have clarified that as we think about our plan for the fall. Another decision that still needs consideration is staffing assignments. So just to be clear that we need to finalize both the hybrid and the distance learning, full-time distance learning models. We need to share that information with you, our families. We need through a survey process to find out what your decision is about the fall, whether you want to come back in the full-time distance learning model or in the hybrid model. Once we have that information, then we also need to match that with the appropriate number of teachers. So we know that we have some teachers who are concerned about returning to classroom instruction and may request accommodations. So we need to go through the process of engaging with them and finding out how many teachers will actually not be available for in-person instruction. We also need to make some final decisions about the role of our teachers on special assignment in their capacity to provide curriculum development and support for full-time distance learning, or in supporting targeted groups of students, et cetera. And again, as we think about staffing assignment, the big implication is how much time do we have at the beginning of the year to finalize these assignments and help teachers plan. Again, that will be finalized in our conversations with SMETA leadership. Yet another decision that remains to be finalized is the calendar decision, as I mentioned, about professional development and planning. We know that we're going to need several days at the start of the school year to ensure that teachers and staff have time to learn both what our health and safety protocols are, what our new curriculum systems are, and have opportunities to plan together. So we know we're going to be targeting several days at the beginning of the year to provide that. And then we need to plan ongoing during the school year when our teachers and staff having an opportunity to meet together and learn. And again, this will be, we will engage with SMETA leadership around this. And a final decision, of course, is around the reentry into school. I mentioned that we may take several days at the beginning of the year just for staff and teachers to work together. These would be not yet learning days. But then once we decide, yes, learning is to start, we may still want to talk about a phased reentry into the school year. We could imagine perhaps the younger students showing up on the first few days of school while the older students stayed out on distance learning, so that we could establish our health and safety protocol with our youngest students and then bring the older students in and along. We may also want to prioritize key student groups, the transition to middle school for sixth graders. It may be important that we bring our sixth graders in first and give them an opportunity to get used to and build community at the school. And again, this is a decision that we will finalize shortly with SMETA leadership. So that covers the range of recommendations we have for the fall. As I come out of this recording, please note that we would appreciate you contacting us with any questions or suggestions. You can see my email address there. Of course, you can email any other staff that you know. In any case, we appreciate your time and the fact that you were willing to sit through this recording. And we look forward to the opportunity to serve you and your students and your families come the fall. Thank you.